Hello, faithful, and welcome to the 49ers Plus podcast. I'm Al Moriello, and this is your source for the most subjective 49ers discussion, only smart takes, never any clickbait. And today we are just going to jump right into some potential defensive targets the 49ers should be looking for when free agency kicks off early next week. Legal tampering period begins Monday. Free agent signings could be officially announced or pen could be put to paper on Wednesday, March 11th. So I want you guys or the folks out there listening in the netherverse, internet world, whatever, to consider this your dose of reality for defensive free agency. And we're going to take a quick detour before we get there and discuss quickly that Matt Eberflus, former head coach of the Bears and last season defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, was hired to the defensive staff by Kyle Shanahan. And of course, 49er fans living up to their 40 Winers moniker complaining about the hire, complaining that the Rams make a trade for Trent McDuffie and the Niners hire a failed head coach and a bad defensive coordinator in Dallas. Remember, though, for what it's worth, Eberflus was the DC in Indianapolis before his time with Chicago, and his run defenses were top 10 in each of the 4 years that he was there. The Niners defense needs help across the board. Pass defense was terrible. Run defense was somewhat better, but still bad. And they have a bunch of free agents that they're going to let walk. We're going to talk about that on the defensive side of the ball, and obviously some positions that they should bring in. But beyond the whining about adding another defensive mind to the staff, how is that a bad thing? Right? How is that a bad thing? Now, people are saying, well, this could be the succession plan if Raheem Morris leaves after a year. Any coordinator that has a good season is going to get sniffs at a head coaching position. Robert Saleh, bad tenure with the Jets, but who's had a good tenure with the Jets outside of Rex Ryan almost in my lifetime? I guess Bill Parcells, right? Those would be the two. Raheem Morris didn't have a great run in Atlanta. Going to be a DC with San Francisco, getting some pieces healthy, adding some supplementary pieces in free agency in the draft. We'll see how the Niners defense and team overall performs and if this leads to a stepping stone for Raheem Morris to becoming a coach again. One thing Matt Eberflus has in common with Raheem Morris is they both like to play more single high safety than the 49ers have in the past. I'm not going to say more single high safety than not. I don't have that data in front of me. But if single high means creating pressure with numbers and the scheme, I'm all for it. Because absent of a dominant front four pass rush, which right now the Niners don't have, it remains to be seen, free agency, the draft, and how the team looks the first, say, month plus of the year when we get into September and October, Morris more than likely is going to need to create pressure with scheme, which is what Robert Saleh struggled mightily to do last year. And again, whether it was the amount of youth and turnover on the roster, keeping things simple so the team can play fast, but you didn't see that improvement in the run defense or the pass defense, and certainly not the pass rush as we got from the second half to the season later. Beating Philadelphia was just as much a Kevin Patullo as the OC and just the Eagles being in shambles sort of thing as much as it was what the Niners did, and obviously got steamrolled by Seattle twice. But that's why as we go into, free agent targets, we're going to start in the defensive line. The Niners don't necessarily need to hit home runs, meaning big ticket free agents on the D-line, I don't want to say are really anywhere, because if anywhere, I would love to see an experienced center fielder at free safety. Again, especially if they're going to be playing some single high or more single high than they have in the past. But what Raheem Morris showed last year with Jeff Ulbrich as his DC, they amped up the pass rush big time. I keep saying Brian Flores in Minnesota. With Danielle Hunter and without Danielle Hunter, that defense the past 3 years had almost the same amount of sacks each year, 48 or 49. And last year's Vikings had 15 players with at least one sack, and the Niners as a team had 20 sacks. And Minnesota ended up with 48 or 49. So I'm going to press pause on all of the stuff that we're seeing on social media or the regular media, TV, radio, whatever it might be, because the Niners are linked to everybody under the sun. And it's not feasible. And it's what adds to the fact that 49er fans become disenchanted and frustrated when they see online, Twitter, X being probably the main culprit, that the Niners are linked to player A, B, C, D, E, F through the alphabet, probably times 2. And they don't get any of these big name players or only sign one of them. And then, what is Lynch and Shanahan doing? Look at the Rams, look at this team and that team, and teams that have more cap space. And Dallas restructured the crap out of their team to get under the cap and free up money. And the Niners can still do that. There's still the Trent Williams situation looming, that if he is released, it's an extra $25 million not realized until June 2nd, but that could be the money held in reserve for draft picks or to help pay off the draft picks, so to speak. And what Lynch likes to have going into the season, about $15 million for in-season moves. So when you take draft picks away, say on the high end, they had $55 million of cap space, $10 million gone for the rookie class. You're down to $45 million. 15-ish million that Lynch likes to carry into a season, like I said, for in-season moves. Now you're down to $30 million of cap space. You can get some good players for $30 million of cap space, but this is not like what the Patriots had last year when they were going out buying everybody. And yes, it got them to a Super Bowl. Things broke their way. I mean, Drake May took a tremendous step forward in his second year. Stephon Diggs, who was subsequently released, had a good year, but they didn't have the weapon, going to Denver without Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham's the quarterback. And it's an ugly defensive game. The first 3 quarters, New England really couldn't do anything, but they got up, and then the snow hit in the late third, fourth quarter, and then nobody was moving the ball. Game over. And then they did not have nearly enough. You could tell the stage was too big for Drake May and the offense against Seattle. But the Niners don't have that cap space that the Patriots had last year or other teams are going to have this year. They have a decent amount, but you can't go willy-nilly. So first off, and I know nobody listening is going to be adopting this mindset because I truly believe I have a very smart viewer and listenership. But for fans out there, I guess, that aren't listening and will never hear this, stop whining. And I'm seeing it far too much that the Niners are going to do nothing or quote unquote sit out free agency this year. Again, hyperbolic words, and words have meaning or they don't. If you're going to say the Niners aren't going to take multiple big swings, I agree with you. They don't have the cap space to do that. Maybe they take one big swing total, or at most 2 big swings. And I would think maybe one on each side of the ball, a receiver and somebody on defense, whether it's on the D line or at free safety. But this thought that the Niners just don't do anything in free agency. Now, last year was more of a shedding year, right? Like shed Malik Collins, shed Leonard Floyd, shed Javon Hargrave, didn't re-sign Dre Greenlaw, didn't re-sign Charvarius Ward, didn't re-sign Talanoa Hufanga, and none of those re-signings made sense given how much money you're paying Warner, how much money you're paying Demo, the fact that you have Renardo Green, and they had promising safeties in Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa. So why are you going to give Talanoa Hufanga that much money? Among other players that they didn't re-sign or might have let go. But here's who they did bring in. And again, it's not an all-star class, but if you're going to say that the Niners are going to sit out free agency this year when they have more cap room than last year, here's what they did last year. Mac Jones, Demarcus Robinson at receiver, Luke Farrell at tight end, Luke Gifford at linebacker, Jason Pinnock at safety, Ciaran Neal at corner safety, John Weeks long snapper, Thomas Morstead punter, Eddie Pinheiro was week 2 kicker, and they signed cornerbacks Trey Brown, who didn't make the team, from Seattle, Trey Tomlinson, who was signed to a future contract and has the possibility to be the backup nickel this year behind Upton Stout, and Richie Grant at safety, who did not make the team. Then they had 10 draft picks, 8 of whom contributed. The only ones that did not were Curtis Rourke, basically on IR all year, and Junior Bergen, the 7th round pick, who was on the practice squad all year. So between your 8 draft picks and your 9 free agents, that's 17 new players on the Niners roster last year out of 53. That's a third of the roster last year that was new. None of the names that I mentioned in free agency is going to get anybody hot and bothered, other than maybe David Lombardi, because if you just show him a 49ers logo, he's leaving a trail like a slug. But the Niners are going to make moves, right? They've only re-signed John Weeks, so they haven't re-signed any of their own yet. We'll see what happens this week, and I'm recording this on Friday night, March 6th, and leading up into Wednesday, March 11th. But they're going to make signings. They're going to make 7 draft picks unless they trade up or down. And say they make 7 picks and 6 contribute. So there's 6 new players. And then there's going to be another 10 draft picks and a whole lot more that are to come in for a 90-man roster. So please don't say that the Niners are going to sit out free agency. If the Niners are going to sit out your version of Madden free agency, where you can turn the cap off and force any ridiculous trade that's out there, then sure, that's what's going to happen. But the Niners are going to be players, and if we know what the deficiencies are on the team, they certainly know what the deficiencies are. But here's a little secret that people don't want to acknowledge or just completely ignore. Free agency is not a situation where the Niners walk into the free agency department store and start picking players they want off the rack, take them up to the register, and pay for them. There are other teams involved. There are agents involved. There's bidding wars. There's going to be wildly overpriced players like Alec Pierce on offense. It's going to get way more money than they deserve based on their previous productivity or upcoming productivity. Just because the Niners want somebody or target them does not mean they get them. Like any other team, there's going to be players that are going to be maybe chasing a playoff berth or a playoff experience or a ring. There's going to be players that are just chasing money. None of that is wrong, but the Niners cannot just abduct free agents and say, you're coming with us, bound them, gag them, blindfold them, throw them in the back of a windowless van and drive them off to Santa Clara. Doesn't work like that, guys. All right, 14 minutes in. Enough of Eberflus and the free agency diatribe. You guys get it. Let's start with defensive tackles. And I have my own, again, budget of what I think they might be looking for D tackle wise. And free agent wise, I think maybe a D tackle, because there is a need, is in the $4 to $8 million annually range. And the need is, one, because the run defense was not good. Pass rush was not good. And only Alfred Collins and CJ West are viable players for the 53-man roster at defensive tackle. Otherwise, I think Jordan Elliott's gone. Kevin Givens is certainly gone. Kali Davis might have the best chance to return, but he might be gone as well. So 5 players that could make their way to San Francisco. And the first one you've seen on social media, and I agree with, John Franklin Myers of Denver, 6'4", 290, can play some end as well, but built more like an interior lineman. 14 and a half sacks last 2 years with Denver, and in those 2 years, he's only missed 1 game. So the productivity looks good at the defensive line spot. you have to also factor in how good that Denver defense has been the last 2 years. And that productivity is just not going to automatically transfer to San Francisco and the Niners line, given right now, at least what we saw last year and what we don't know how everything's going to shake out. So as nice of a target as John Franklin Myers is, and I think he is one, there's someone called Robert Saleh who coached him in New York, who's the coach of the Tennessee Titans now. And they just traded Devondre Sweat they traded one of their big D tackles. I'm blanking on the name. I apologize, to the Jets for Jermaine Johnson. So you could say they might have a need at D tackle next to Jeffrey Simmons. And it's someone that Saleh has coached before and presumably likes. So again, a player that the Niners might be linked to, but could get outbid by the Titans, who have significantly more cap space than San Francisco does. Otherwise, now we're looking at, players, and I'm not sure what Raheem Morris is going to be looking for at the defensive line or the interior defensive line. But if you're looking at more like true nose tackle type players, you could look at someone like Greg Gaines last year with Tampa Bay, 6'1", 310, or Tim Settle last year on that very good Houston defensive line. Again, 6'3", 310, a little bit bigger. You have Derek Noddy from Kansas City, 6'1", 315. So the first Greg Gaines and Derek Noddy, more of like your true nose tackle. Tim Settle, you can get for, I think, a decent, on the lower end of maybe the $4 or $5 million a year. And DJ Davidson of the Giants, a little bit bigger, 6'5", 320. They need more beef in the middle. They need defensive tackles that can penetrate. And they need a whole lot of defensive linemen to bring into camp. But I think 1 or 2 defensive tackles in free agency, and I still think it's a good idea to draft one, because you're going to get a defensive tackle super cheap, even if you draft one in the first round at 27, to start building up the line, building back up the line. Remember, the Niners for a while were known as like a really good run defense, and it hasn't been that way like the past 3 seasons. The Niners need to get back to doing that, force teams to be one-dimensional a little bit more, and let Raheem Morris send the house. If that's his philosophy, and it looked like it was last year, blitzed the second highest rate behind the Vikings with Jeff Ulbrich as the defensive coordinator, we'll see if Kyle lets him. And even though they're friends, Kyle's the head coach, and he has his thumbprint all over this roster, personnel-wise and schematically. But let's see if he loosens the reins significantly and lets Morris go to work a little bit. Now, defensive ends. This is where I think they could take a moderate swing. And a moderate swing, say a double, maybe a triple if you want to push it to third base, $7 to $10 million annually. Now, there's been some discussion online about potentially cutting Bryce Huff, who has no guaranteed money and saves $5 million on the cap. My question is why? I think Bryce Huff is one of the answers to a defensive end rotation that doesn't have many answers, right? Bryce Huff is not the problem. It's when Bryce Huff is your primary pass rusher, that's the problem. When he's number 3 coming in, and you can put Bosa on one side and an interior rusher next to one of your D tackles, then you've got something. But when you're relying on Bryce Huff to be essentially an every down player, not gonna work. And yeah, saving $5 million on the cap sounds great-ish, but is it really? It's not like it's $15 million on the cap. A decent defensive end is going to cost you more than that anyway. And if he's your rotational defensive end, I would be more in favor of extending Bryce Huff, because he is quick off the line. He is a good, more suited as a third down pass rush specialist than anything else, but he needs players in front of him, and players in front of him that can stay healthy. Bosa didn't. And the whole D line, there was a lot of ins and outs throughout the year. Mikel went down, had to trade for Keon White. And that's another aspect of this that I've said on previous podcasts. So Mikel Williams is coming back from the knee injury. None of us should expect the pass rush immediately, and who knows when he's going to be ready, to be that much better than what we saw in 2025. And he was drafted more to be initially an edge setter with a thought that the pass rush would come along, and the Niners needed to start coming along. But Mikel Williams and Keon White are your tweeners that can play outside and inside, but they're not pure defensive ends. And I've said previously, the Niners, because they have Mykel Williams and Keion White, and there's no guarantee Keion White makes the roster. I think the chances are better than average because they like having that in-between body type to serve as the Yetur Gross-Matos role, but a healthier player, even though Keion White is recovering from, he got shot in the ankle not too long ago, but will be fine for camp or even mini camp. They need 4 pure DNs. They need 2 tweeners, which they have in Mykel and Keion White, and 4 D tackles beyond what they're bringing to camp. But defensive end specifically, we are saying no to Trey Hendrickson, guys. My mandate is I'm looking at all the players I'm going to share with you, and this list is the biggest of all the position groups, or the longest, under 30 years old. At the start of the season, I want someone under 30 years old. Hendrickson, really good player. But you're going to he's going to command what? $25+ million a year? No. No. Khalil Mack's a free agent, 34, 35 years old. If Bryce Huff is going to be your third down rusher, they need a starter opposite Bosa. That's not where Khalil Mack is right now. Joey Bosa, as nice as it would be for the brothers Bosa to play together, had a relatively healthy season in Buffalo for what he's going to command. I would sway away from that, especially with some of the injury history. Bradley Chubb, maybe cut by the Dolphins, 29 or 30, right on that age cusp for me. See what he demands. If you can get him for close to 10, I would, take a long, hard look. Otherwise, some players to consider. I'm not saying any of these are going to sign with the Niners. Again, if I was this good at prognosticating anything, I would be ridiculously rich based on my bets and sports bets, AC, Las Vegas. That's just not how it works. But just some thoughts. So Malcolm Koonce, formerly of the Raiders, 6'3", 243, 12.5 sacks the last 2 years. Now, some of this is going to be based on what does Raheem Morris have a body type? He might not, because one of his draft picks was James Pierce out of Tennessee last year, who had 10.5 sacks. And he was kind of like a 6'5", 240-pound Leonard Floyd-ish type of defensive end. So we need to know, even as a starter, and maybe the defensive line, the rotation as a whole, D-end tackles are going to be so fluid that starter outside of Bosa doesn't mean anything. But Malcolm Koonce, a little bit on the smaller and lighter side, as is name from the past. At least I live in the Northeast, but you guys should all recognize Azeez Al-Jouari. Started with the Giants, was with the Eagles last year, 6'3", 240. Didn't do much with Philly last year, but had 22 sacks in his 4 years with New York. I think you can definitely get him in that $7 to $10 million price range, maybe less. Has been banged up a little bit, so that's why the maybe less. You'd want to lean towards that. But someone that has shown he can get to the quarterback. Dipping into the Falcons free agency, a player that Raheem Morris is familiar with, Arnold Ebiketie, 6'2", 250, 16.5 sacks in 4 years with Atlanta. More durable than Al-Jouari. Built, a little bit bigger in terms of weight, but these first 3 in terms of size, a little bit smaller than your traditional 49er defensive end, at least this past year. Because the year before that, they did have Leonard Floyd, and D Ford going back to 2019 was like 6'2", 240, 250, nothing huge. Mike Dana from the Chiefs, 6'2", 255, 21.5 sacks in his 6 years with Kansas City. Steve Spagnuolo knew how to employ him and use him. Wasn't getting a ton of starter reps, but a good rotational defensive end. Could he slide into a starter role with San Francisco? Maybe, I'm not sure. But again, how is Raheem Morris going to use the defensive line? Sam Williams of the Cowboys, 6'4", 260, 9.5 sacks in 3 years, missed 2024. Might be more of the rotational piece. And yeah, he missed 2024 with the knee injury. And didn't have a ton of playing time last year as he was rehabbing back. The Niners would have to make sure the medicals check out completely. Michael Clemens of the Jets, 6'5", 260, 8.5 sacks in 4 years with the Jets. Another former player of Robert Saleh that he could look at with the Titans now. And Kingsley and Enagbare, 6'4", 260, 11.5 sacks in 4 years with the Packers. Now, one player that hasn't been released yet, another Packer that very well might, Rashawn Gary, 6'5", 275, 15 sacks the last 2 years. Yes, the Niners should inquire. Like they should inquire about anybody. It would be organizational malpractice if they didn't ask about these high-end or higher-end players. Again, guys, it guarantees nothing. He's going to have suitors, left tackles, defensive ends, wide receiver one, and cornerback one are so in demand. Everybody wants that elite player at those positions. And of course, quarterback. You're not going to get them cheap. I would love for the Niners to make a defensive line signing or D-tackle and DN signing on day one of free agency. But generally, if you're making signings on day one or day two, you are paying a premium price because that's generally when all the top-end players have negotiated on Monday the 9th and Tuesday the 10th and Wednesday the 11th. They're signed, although they're going to announce stuff on Monday and Tuesday. And the Niners might not be in that boat for any or many beyond maybe one or two players that are high-price ticket players. Now let's go to linebackers. I'm thinking now, are they going to give, do they want just D. Winters to just completely win the role? How much is Nick Martin going to be a factor? Tatum Bethune is clearly the backup, at least obviously to Fred Warner until they potentially find somebody better. But we're going to say no to Tremaine Edmonds, formerly the Bears, got cut. Too expensive. Bobby Okereke of the Giants, a free agent. Too expensive. Quincy Williams of the Jets was linked to the Niners when Robert Saleh was here at the trade deadline. Too expensive. My philosophy remains firm that if you're paying a high-priced player at a certain position, you are not or should not, San Francisco, bring in a second high-priced player at that position. Warner is going to be healthy. If nothing else, Bethune got some valuable snaps. Winters got some valuable snaps. Nick Martin, they drafted him in the third round for a reason, a run and hit linebacker. Can he put it together in training camp? But there are some veterans that could, the first two, could walk in and potentially be the starter next to Fred Warner. Let's start with Dallas, formerly Dallas Cowboy, Logan Wilson. Traded for him from Cincinnati. He's a free agent, 6'2", 245, 145 tackles the last 2 seasons. If they want, I don't know if he's going to be coming in, at $2 to $3 million annually, but if they can get him for close to that and have him compete to start next to Warner, not a bad tandem. Devin White, last year with Las Vegas, 6', 250. I don't think he was that big. 174 total tackles the last 2 years with Las Vegas. Now we're getting into some depth pieces, right? Jack Sanborn, again, of the Cowboys, 6'2", 234. You're going to need linebackers to play special teams, and you can go younger, and each one of these players is younger than the I'm blanking on the linebacker that the Niners had, Luke Gifford, last year, who I don't think is going to be coming back. You have another option, Jack Cochrane from the Chiefs, 6'3", 236. KJ Britt from Miami, 6', 240. And Christian Harris from the Texans, very good defense. Granted, he was a backup there and will be a backup with San Francisco, 6'2", 232. So those last 3 or 4, again, depth pieces, I don't know what Raheem Morris thinks of the linebacking unit, if there is a viable or bona fide starter next to Fred Warner, and you still have the draft, and nobody should be scared off of, the draft didn't work with Nick Martin. He didn't have a good rookie year, so you can't bring a rookie linebacker in next to Fred Warner. I agree. Maybe you don't put your hopes on a rookie winning the starting spot next to Fred Warner, but you don't shy away from drafting a running back, say in the 4th or 5th round, that can help your roster start out on special teams and potentially work your way back up. Meanwhile, you still have former Niners and Garrett Wallow and Curtis Robinson in the mix that could come back that haven't re-signed yet. They have 4 linebackers signed to the roster that are going to make the team. There's 2 spots open at max on the 53-man roster. They'll probably bring in another 4 or 5 for training camp, maybe even more than that, but only 2 real spots at them. And I would love to almost see them go with 5 linebackers, but at most 2 real spots open on the 53. Cornerbacks. as a depth piece, at least for now. So maybe $2 to $4 million annually I'm budgeting, because it is Demo, it is Upton Stout, it is Renardo Green for now. And I don't think he gets traded unless Raheem Morris wants nothing to do with him. That whole sideline spat with Kyle against the Seahawks, wildly blown out of proportion. And bringing back Trey Tomlinson, originally with the Rams, with the Niners, last year on IR, signed to a future contract. Smaller corner like Upton Stout, but could win the backup slot role in a very inexpensive way. Darrell Luter isn't guaranteed anything as cornerback number 4, and he's on the last year of his rookie deal, which is why I would think it would behoove the Niners bring in a veteran, someone that can play some special teams, that can spot start. They do have Eli Apple to a future contract that could remain on the practice squad, and draft somebody. Stay young, keep the pipeline going, right? But as far as free agents go, I know the Niners online have been linked to Tariq Woolen. No thanks. He was the weak link of the Seattle Seahawks defense, and certainly their secondary. Whatever he's going to get, $8, $9, $10 million. I mean, he's going to be beyond what I think the Niners should spend on a corner. Again, when you right now have your top 3 locked in and you're looking at cornerback 4 or a backup cornerback at the most, you're not going to be spending on Tariq Woolen or Greg Newsome from the Browns or Eric Stokes. All good players, Newsome and Stokes being better than Tariq Woolen, but out of the Niners price range. This is not where you take even a medium swing. This is a single. $2 to $4 million for a cornerback, I consider a single. Now, players I would look at, and the first one I had a hard time actually putting down because I was like, I don't know. But again, we're talking cornerback 4 or 5. Jeff Okudah, drafted out of Ohio State by the Lions 4 or 5 years ago. Didn't fare that well, was with Minnesota last year. Physically looks the part. Now, can Raheem Morris and the recently hired defensive backs coach from the Falcons get potentially more out of him? Sure. 6'1", 200. He has started 31 games in his career, essentially 2 seasons worth of starts. That's valuable experience to call up or to call on someone should one of your starting corners get hurt. Again, and Jeff Okudah may come less than $2 million a year. That's not saying you sign him because he's cheap. Again, you're going to get outbid for other people, but who are you looking to sign? And for people to say, oh, sign a bona fide number 2 and push Renardo Green back, you can do that. But as long as Renardo Green's on the team, he's cost controlled for the next 2 years. And the Niners have more pressing needs on the roster than finding a starting number 2 cornerback. But some other names, Noah Igbayanin of the Washington Commanders, formerly of the Dolphins, I believe, 5'11", 200, 12 starts the last 2 years with the Commanders. Martin Everson of the Browns, 6'2", 200 pounds, only been with the Browns for 3 years, 33 starts in 3 years with Cleveland. He's probably going to be out of the price range, but you never know. A potential player to look at. Robert Rochelle of the Panthers, 6'2", 200. Darion Kendrick of the Rams. I know he wasn't great with the Rams. 6 feet, 190. Does have 18 starts in 3 seasons. So between Okudah, Emerson, Rochelle, and Kendrick, more of the outside boundary corner, at least 6 foot tall, if not 6'1" or 6'2". Noah Igbayanin can play inside, outside at 5'11", but, could have some value as a potential backup to Upton Stout, or at least the versatility to play inside and outside. Not saying that the Niners are going to sign any of these players, but I think if the Niners are going to take a big swing or even a moderate swing, I don't necessarily believe it happens at cornerback unless there are legitimate things going on behind the scenes in San Francisco with Renardo Green. And last but not least, safety. And we're going to go triple here. High double, triple. I think this is where the Niners can take a swing. Certainly somewhere on the D-line, right? Probably more D-end. D-tackle is a big need as well. That the whole line is completely in flux and injured and ineffective and just needs work. But the Niners need a center fielder. If they're going to be playing more single high safety, they need more productivity out of a center fielder. So $7 to $10 million annually. Jaquan Brisker of the Bears, 6'1", 200 pounds, 1 interception in each of the last 4 years. Now, that's not great ball production, but it's not any worse than what you're getting out of Niners safeties now. And Siegel and Brown and Mustafa, none of them are a center fielder unless Raheem Morris and company can transform. And it's not Mustafa. He's more a glorified linebacker playing strong safety. He's more an in the box safety. Marquez Siegel, the jury's out because he got playing time early on, was in decent position covering receivers and tight ends, but always seemed to get beat. Better tackler than cover safety. And Jair Brown, not even hot and cold. He's more like warmish and cold. 2 interceptions last year. Maybe he had a third, but 2 I remember were on Monday night against the Panthers. So Brisker an option. Jalen Thompson, formerly of the Cardinals, 5'11", 190 pounds, 9 interceptions in his time with Arizona. Chauncey Gardner Johnson, 5'11", 210, 15 interceptions. He was with Chicago last year in the last 4 years. Geno Stone of Cincinnati, 5'11", 210, 13 picks the last 3 years. And Tony Adams of the Jets, 5'11", 200, 4 interceptions in his 4 years with the Jets. Now, I don't know where any of this is going to net out, right? I don't know. But in terms of defensive needs, let's say I would rank them like this: D end, free safety, D tackle, cornerback, and linebacker. I mean, and you could flip linebacker and cornerback, and I really wouldn't argue it. If they can find someone to start to beat out D Winters and Nick Martin and start next to Fred Warner. I don't know, again, unless there's a trade happening, that if they're gonna find anyone that's gonna beat out Upton Stout or Renardo Green. Certainly possible. But I'm not sure. There is work to be done. There is work to be done, right? And there's at most $55 million in cap space. 10 comes off for rookies. You're down to $45 million, and say between $10 and $15 million that Lynch wants to have going into next season. So you're down to about $35 million to spend, which is a good amount, but it's not nearly as much as some other teams have. And we're just talking defense here, right? There's a whole other side of the ball that a left guard, a receiver or 2, probably one in free agency and hopefully one in the draft. Probably a running back because Kyle can't help himself and doesn't trust young players. A tight end, maybe, if Jake Tonjes doesn't re-sign. Any sort of depth on the offensive line. There was talk about Ben Barch coming back, and people got their panties all up in a bunch. As a backup O-lineman, fine, but he should not be the left guard that you're going to be counting on. And we went over those prospects a few days ago. So that concludes this podcast. 3 days apart, offense a couple days ago, defensive free agents today. Not saying I'm Nostradamus or anything close to it, and I'm as excited as you are to see what happens in the legal tampering period in early next week. And if any 49ers whose contracts have expired get re-signed this weekend. And I hope most of all that I'm wrong, maybe regarding I can't be wildly wrong about budget stuff because there's an end to the money. It's just not bottomless, right? But maybe they start spending more at more positions than I think they're going to. But what I laid out here on the defensive side of the ball feels right, even though I'm a conservative person by nature, for what the Niners need. And as far as the names I threw out there, guys, your guess is as good as mine. I'm not taking any victory laps if the Niners, sign a player from each one of the positions that I listed on offense or defense. I think I know and the positions that are needed. It's just a matter of how much they're willing to spend at each one of the positions of need. So that concludes the podcast. Like always, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make us part of your viewing and listening routine. Free agency is imminent. Exciting. I know the Niners haven't made any moves yet or re-signings yet other than John Weeks, but every day we are getting closer, and it's going to be fast, furious, and wild next week. I can't wait for it, and I'm sure you can't as well. But whatever you're doing between now and when we speak again, and depending on the Niners' activity, there's definitely going to be a podcast, maybe 2 next week, to track what the Niners are doing, to be determined. But whatever you are doing between now and when we speak again, faithful, stay happy, healthy, and safe. We will talk soon. Take care.